So finally, another interesting mini PC with dedicated graphics and one that can game at 1440p and 1080p, as you will see in this review. It is the MinisForum HX100G. It comes now with the Ryzen 7 7840HS, and the dedicated graphics that has 8 gigabytes of RAM is the Radeon RX 6650M. So compared to the HX99G, this HX100G is a very minor, and I'm talking super minor, bump up in performance. So what do we get inside? Well, there's this little warning card that tells us not to disassemble the cooler because they use liquid metal, and if you do so, you're going to void your warranty. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to touch it. It's going to be as is, the thermals and everything out of the factory. There is a user guide. We get our power supply, which is rather big, rather chunky, but it is powerful to, of course, power that dedicated GPU. And then the APU, it's 262 watts. We get our power cable, an HDMI cable, and then this is part of the base if you want to stand it up vertically. And here is the base part of that stand. So there's a few things included there. So this design is not new to us. This is about the third time they have used it. So we have separate audio jacks here. This is a USB 3.2, and that is Gen 1 here, so the 5 gigabits per second power on there. And this Type-C, also USB 3.1, that one there, so not the USB 4 ports. Those USB 4 ports, they're located on the rear, and that's okay. I would have liked to have seen, however, one at the front. So you get two of them at the rear here, 40 gigabits per second, two HDMIs right here. They are HDMI 2.0. But the Type-Cs, they can do 4K 60 Hertz, which is good. Now we get another USB 3.2s Gen 1s here, and this is a USB 3.2 Gen 2. So that's the 10 gigabits per second. This is why this one's separate. And gigabit LAN, our RJ45 connector. So kind of disappointing. It's not 2.5G this one, but hey, that's what we get. At least we do have the LAN port on here. And this is our power plug, which looks a little bit different. It's some of the laptops out there that I used to review in the past had a power plug like this one. It's not your typical barrel connector, but it is common. This model does have some really beefy cooling inside. You can see a big vent here at the bottom. This is where you screw in that stand, and you can see the little radiator in there. And if I look at a certain angle where you can just see there's two fans in this. It's very quiet, in fact, extremely quiet, this mini PC, and the cooling on it is really good. I do like it, but it's not so mini. This is more like a small form factor PC to me, how large it is, the size of it. So you can see vents all around, which is really good. Now, if you want to gain access to the internals, well, you're going to have to remove these rubber feet here, but it's very easy to do. Just grab a corner there and pull it up, and hopefully some of that adhesive doesn't stay behind. Well, a little bit has, but it's not too bad. So there's two screws here and another two here, and I'll show you the internals now. So do make sure you earth yourself. Don't touch your dog or anything. You don't want to zap this with any static. So you see there, this is our SSD slot. We've got one here, and that's 2280. This is our boot drive with a heatsink on it. There's no ventilation here at the bottom, but they have put, you can see those heat sinks on the RAM too as well. Now this is our other 2280 PCIe 4.0 slot, screws in right there, and be careful with these heat sinks, okay? If you're going to use your own RAM, but you want to keep those heat sinks and put them on, I have found that adhesive they've used, which is like it's a thermal pad, it sticks on really strong. And what happened with the ITX, or what is it, the UM780 ITX X, I ended up pulling off one of the actual chips of the RAM, so be very careful with that. I ended up ruining the RAM, which was not good. It's our BIOS battery right here. Nothing else to see apart from the MediaTek wireless card here, so that is also replaceable. So add your SSD, RAM here, wireless card, that's it. That's it for the upgrades. I wouldn't bother going over the other side because you're going to void your warranty there because of the liquid metal they're using. First up, our BIOS. It is unlocked, which is good to see. So there's a few options in here we could tweak. Now, power configuration, you've got the AC failure resume. Very handy if you plan to run this as a server or you always want it to be on. Then make sure that you put it on always on. So when the power goes off, comes back on, it'll boot itself back up again. AMD CBS, well, normally if this was just running off that integrated graphics, you could go along to the MBIO common options. and tweak the graphics configuration here. But we don't need to do that. In fact, we don't want any RAM wasted because we have, of course, the RX 6650. And the other interesting setting would be this one here. So it's the SMU Common Options System Configuration. This is where we can set a power limit. So I'm going to put it onto the top setting, 54 watts. I don't know what it is by default, but I believe it is 54 watts anyway, I think, by default. But I'll put it onto 54. That's the only change you're going to make. You could mess about with some other settings in here as well. There is the fan control options, smart shift control too. You could change that, but again, recommend you don't really touch any of that stuff. Eco mode, wouldn't bother with that. It's going to put it onto 35 watts. So really not anything of interest in there more, apart from boot order there that you might need to change if you wanted to boot over to Linux or whatever and use an external drive. But let's jump into Windows here now. The HX100G is running, of course, that GPU that I talked about in the intro. So it's the Radeon RX 6650M. It has 8 gigabytes of DDR6 RAM from Samsung and a lot more potent than integrated graphics. The whole reason for getting this, as you'll see with my test later on that I've already done, it can game at 1080p and even 1440p. Pretty good with decent frame rates going well over 60 frames per second. So 54 watt part here, of course, our APU. It does have integrated graphics. It is not disabled. It's still there. They didn't need to disable it, so it's fine doing that. And you see that the memory timing's not very tight at all. They're, you know, pretty normal kind of for laptop components, which this does have, of course, but in a mini PC. So the RAM speeds, dual channel, 5600 mega transfers, and really nothing else to show you, 54 watt part there. So that all checks out. So onto the benchmarks. I have run some benchmarks here and comparing them to the previous model that I reviewed, which of course was the MinisForum HX100G. So this is the new model here, the difference being the slightly tweaked GPU, and then the APU, which is slightly faster here, being the 7840HS. So you can see our scores here. Graphics barely went up compared to the previous model. So this is the previous model here. You can see that is an abysmal improvement. We're not looking at anything really. Basically the same performance, but CPU score, yes, is about 2,000 points better. Firestrike, you're seeing a similar kind of difference here. So graphics score is 24,000. The previous model with the RX 66, or should I say 6600M, about 1,000 point difference. That's it. So basically nothing there, no reason to upgrade, but they don't make the previous model, the older model anymore. So this is all you can get from MinisForum now. And finally, this is Geekbench 6 there. So this is an improvement here over the previous model by a little bit there. Multi-core score slightly better and the single. So no big surprises there. So I have just a couple of other benchmarks here to show you. One is the SSD. So benchmarked that with Crystal Disk Mark, and you can see it's, yeah, all right, but you know, not the fastest you can get out of PCIe 4.0 drives. Decent speeds, but if you want faster, get something like a Samsung 980 Pro. I was hoping to show you Cinebench 2024, but it keeps just jamming on me now. It's not running into thermal throttling or any issues like that. It's just, for some reason, it's not stable here. And you can see that the GPU score there is just over almost 4,500 points. Nothing amazing. Well, it's only the RX 6650, as you know, and single core score over 100 there. But the multi-core score, I haven't been able to get that result, unfortunately. And video editing with the HX100G. So the timeline is very quick with my 4K 100 megabit per second files, not a problem. You notice that the dedicated GPU is definitely helping, makes things a little bit faster.
Now, if you boost this right,
and playback is definitely smooth. I've only got the resolution set here to a quarter, but I could run this at half or even full, and it's going to be able to handle that. You see, wherever I go on that timeline, it does seem to be good.
Is actually very handy to have for those especially that are...
And it's not dropping any frames. Let's have a look at the export time now. Okay, that was actually a little bit faster than I thought, probably because of the faster CPU there that we do have, that APU. So that was approximately, I'd say 20 seconds, considering my delay, 2021 there. That's hardly any improvement, about 2 seconds. So not a lot at all. But hey, it's faster. Finally, some gaming. So let's take a look at how it performs. And Assassin's Creed Valhalla ran the in-game benchmark with high settings, 1080p again, and this is the result. An average of 94 frames per second, the minimum was 41, and the max 215, so very playable. I wanted to see how far I could push it and decided to run it at 1440p. Not bad, with an average of 66 frames per second, so very playable even at 1440p. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the in-game benchmark. This is 1080p with the high preset. And this is the result, so an average of 69 frames per second. Again, very playable. Cyberpunk 2077, high preset, 1080p. And we got a very respectable here, almost 100 frames per second average, 97.5. And finally for our gaming, The Witcher 3, this is in a very demanding area that I like to test out because there's so much to render, all the different lights and reflections and everything. 1080p, high preset, and we're getting over 100 frames per second. And you can see the temperature's very good, only around 60 degrees Celsius. And to really stress it out, I did test The Witcher 3 here at 1440p with the ultra preset of graphics, and surprised to see it's getting 60 frames per second. Looks really good, and I could actually game like this at 60 frames per second. It's perfectly fine. Thermals, and what are we looking at for power consumption here? So you can see that the CPU is going to be pulling up to around about 67 watts. That's the CPU package power that I've seen. Thermals are excellent. So this is all the stress tests I've done. So gaming, 3D Mark, Cinebench, all of that, right? Hasn't gone over 80 degrees Celsius. Good. That gets a thumbs up from me. Temperatures like the RAM getting hot, yes, up to 80 degrees. That's its peak, and you can see why they have the heat sinks on them. But stability has been fine, no random reboots, no problems like that. And scrolling down further, what about the RX 6650? Well, again, very good. It gets up to 68. The hotspot, or the VR temperatures get up to 90. So, yeah, they're getting up there, definitely. And the VR system on a chip, they're 87, but still okay, not bad. But the GPU temperature itself, very good. And that memory junction temp, all good. This is during gaming as well, pushing it very hard. So I'm happy with that. So power consumption, I've seen it peak over 200 watts, and idle, it's about 11 watts that I saw too. So that's fine. Now, fan noise, very good most of the time. When you game, you hear just a bit of a whooshing noise, but it's not offensive. I'm very pleased with the fan noise. Here's a sample, worst case scenario, gaming, pushing it really hard. I also did plan to show you Linux, but I've been running into this problem with secure boot. I disable it in the BIOS, but it doesn't seem to disable, and I can't seem to boot any of my USB pen drives with Linux distros on them.
So running through the pros now, fan noise, very good. This thing is so quiet. You only hear it when you start to push it hard gaming. We've got plenty of ports on it, which is really good to see. Then we've got those two USB 4 ports. Now, I wanted to comment that my external drive I connected up with USB 4 would occasionally disconnect. This is a very common problem I see with AMD with USB 4.0, that it would just disconnect, reconnect in a moment. And when I use things like Thunderbolt 4 or USB other Type-C ports with Intel, I don't seem to run into that issue for some reason. They're connected. They don't reconnect and disconnect. It only happened about twice out of the 3 days I've been using this, so not too bad, but I wanted to mention that. The other is secure boot. I can't seem to disable it. Every time I go to disable it, as I showed you, and save it in the BIOS, it re-enables itself. Other than that, very good mini PC, but a little pricey. This configuration with the 32 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, is selling for just over 1,000 euros. So a bit pricey there. But thanks a lot for watching my review of this fantastic, capable gaming mini PC if you stick to 1080p and 1440p resolutions.